Welcome to the Veterinary Financial Podcast, where we discuss financial freedom and professional success. I'm Meredith Jones, a veterinarian and financial planner for vets.
And I'm David Azis. I'm also a financial planner for vets.
So today we are doing a student loan update. So it's been a little while since we've had a student loan update, and we wanted to talk about what's new and what's next. There is a sort of limbo situation going on with student loans right now. There have been some court challenges to save. There's been a pause on forgiveness, but not payments, where a lot of folks who are on PAYE and ICR, for example. Talk about this a little bit, David. What's led to that limbo with student loans?
First, I'll treat this episode as hopefully it's cathartic for everyone, because what is going on right now is very frustrating for all of us, and it's all really dumb. It's
crazy.
Stupid. So with that out of the way, to answer your question, and yes, it's all dumb. Here's a general timeline of what has happened over basically the last half a year to a year. I guess I'll start with, in July 2024, the courts attacked SAVE. That put a pause on basically the whole student loan system. For a while, the servicers weren't even processing anything, like any change that you tried to make, even if it didn't have to do necessarily with SAVE. So everything was paused, and anybody who was on the SAVE plan got put into an administrative forbearance with no payment due, but those months in the administrative forbearance were no longer counting towards forgiveness anymore. So it's this giant limbo. That was even before the election. Fast forward, Trump won. And if you've been following the Student Loan Planner newsletter, you would know that we think that SAVE is probably dead. It is almost guaranteed to be dead. But we're still all in this limbo. It's still held up in the courts. And we're recording this as of February 18th, 2025. The latest update, and again, if you want all the latest court updates and litigation updates, just follow Student Loan Planner Podcast, follow the YouTube channel, because Travis gets way into the weeds on that more than I even feel comfortable. Today, the appeals court, I guess, kicked it back to the lower courts. And so what does that mean? The loading bar, those old loading bars on old computers, went from 55% to 60%. We're still in limbo. So today's episode, we'll talk about some of the ridiculous things that have been happening, but we'll also go through some general scenarios of who should no-brainer stay on the SAVE plan on purpose? Who should no-brainer switch plans? And maybe go through some gray area cases too, because there's a lot of cases where it depends. And so we'll go through a bunch of those different scenarios today, and hopefully that'll give you guys, the listeners, some things to think about. But that being said, it's a mess. So let's get to it. Let's start with, Meredith, if you're okay with it, I'll talk about some cases where it's a no-brainer, should stay on SAVE. And then maybe we can pivot to, what if you shouldn't? Some no-brainer cases where this forbearance is good for you is, one, what if your optimum student loan strategy long-term was to pay the loans off anyway, not going for forgiveness? In which case, if you were never going to go for forgiveness anyway, stay in this SAVE forbearance as long as it exists, as long as it's possible, because the SAVE forbearance is technically 0% interest, so that your loan balance isn't going up if you're in the SAVE forbearance, in which case, it's not supposed to. And there are cases I verified where it's not. The 0% forbearance is a real thing. There's some cases where it's not being applied correctly. So that's the other frustrating part about this, is there's the letter of the law of what's supposed to happen, and then there's the logistical implementation of what's going on, and it's a mess. And so there's lots of cases of what's supposed to be happening isn't happening. There's no easy fix for if something's not supposed to happen and it's happening. You got to do some work to fix it, and that's not fun. Calling the servicers, complaining, all that kind of stuff. So we're not going to talk too much about that other than to say that is happening, and that sucks. But let's say you are accurately in the 0% forbearance, and you were going to go for payoff anyway, because forgiveness wasn't going to save you more money than paying the loans off. Cool. Stay in it. Paying off 0% loans is cheaper than paying off not 0% loans. Take the forbearance, and I guess you could pay it off aggressively while it, but you might also want to invest the difference elsewhere and take the free. It's kind of like the COVID pause.
Pile it up in a high yield savings account.
Yeah, or max out that 401k or whatever. The thing is, what to do with the money, that's specific, but it's if you are going for payoff, stay in the forbearance. It saves you money. Another case of makes sense to no-brainer stay in the save forbearance, not try to change anything, is what if you have something like credit card debt? What if you don't have an emergency fund? If your cash reserves are so low, where either a tiny emergency would put you into credit card debt, or you are in credit card debt and you have a credit card game plan to pay it off, it's what's a couple more, if you try to get out of the forbearance, for the benefit of maybe a couple extra months more credit towards forgiveness, that's good, but it's not as good as if you just took those payments and put it on the credit card debt to save all that interest. Those are a couple no-brainer cases of, hey, don't freak out, take advantage of the safe forbearance. We want to talk about PSLF a little bit and buyback, but what are some cases where it might make sense to try to switch? Or maybe switch strategically at a specific time? Meredith, what's at least one example of when someone should try to switch and the timing about trying to switch?
Mm-hmm. One example of strongly consider going ahead and switching is if you are going for PSLF, if you're going for public service loan forgiveness, because every month that goes by that you are on save, you are not able to make a payment that counts toward PSLF. So if you're in a government or nonprofit job and you are going for that type of forgiveness, then in a lot of cases, not all, but in a lot of cases, it makes sense to go ahead and switch plans. Now, the exception to that would be, of course, if you can't afford the payment, because a lot of people haven't had to recertify their income in a long time. A lot of people, their payment was, before it went on pause due to the Save Court actions, they were making a payment that was based on 2018 income. So if it's been that long ago, then, that's something that's a consideration, whether you're going for PSLF or whether you're going for the long-term forgiveness. But in a lot of cases, especially if you don't see yourself in a PSLF qualifying job long term, that would be a reason to go ahead and switch so that you don't miss out on those months going toward that 10-year time frame.
On that topic, I guess we should talk about buyback. There's a program called PSLF Buyback where all these months that were in the forced forbearance, right, or technically any months in forbearance, if you add up all the months that aren't counting towards your PSLF credit because they were in forbearance, and in counting those months would have put you at 120 or more, then cool, you can do, quote, the PSLF buyback program and be done. What you would do is they would, allegedly, this is very new, send you an agreement to buy back all those months of credit that you didn't make a payment because you were in, the safe forbearance, for example. So you'll lump sum pay to get those months credited to be done. But here's a couple things about the program. You wouldn't initiate it until doing so would put you at 120 or more. So if you're at 50 months of credit and you've got, 8 months of save forbearance that could have counted, doesn't matter. You can't do anything with that program yet. If you're at 115 and you've got 8 months of save forbearance, you could technically do the buyback today. The amount of the buyback is supposed to be the lesser of whatever the payment was before the forbearance or the standard tenure at the most. That gets a little iffy, though, of exactly what they're going to say each payment that you're buying back should be counted as. So I like to say err on the side of caution. What would be the highest monthly payment that it would possibly be, times the amount of payments you're buying back, and then be pleasantly surprised if it's less. Because it'd be great if, you were on a $0 per month save payment and, you're buying back, and then you went to the save forbearance, and then now you're buying back 6 months at $0 times 6 months. That'd be great. It's just be prepared for the worst, hope for the best, right? But that's the buyback program. And so something to keep in mind is if, again, you've got 5 more years left of PSLF, 8 more years left, a long time, more than 2 years, really. Just keep in mind there's no guarantee that that program will be around forever. It's not in the law like PSLF is. But if you're at the very end, it's something to consider.
So another example of reasons to switch, we've got a couple of examples of wait and switch. So meaning wait a little bit longer, but then have a plan to switch in the next few months. So one example of that would be, okay, we are in the middle of tax season right now. So there are some folks who maybe last year they filed their taxes married filing jointly, and they have found out or circumstances have changed in such a way that it makes a lot of sense for them to file married filing separately moving forward. So because when you switch off of SAVE, you have to recertify your income. So if you were looking at, for example, a 2023 married filing jointly tax return that would have more income on it than your married filing separately 2024 tax return, then you're going to want to always use the tax return that is more beneficial for you. So in that case, you might wait until after you file your taxes married filing separately.
Yeah, I'll give an example of how tax season is impacting one of my clients. They did file separately in 2023, and they're planning on filing separately in 2024. So it wasn't a separate versus joint issue, but my client had a baby in 2024 and was on unpaid maternity leave for a few months. And she normally makes a lot of money. So 2 months of no pay is a big difference on paper. Now, she was fine. We planned for that, right? But we were in this interesting place where she really wanted to switch from the save forbearance to pay, like immediately, because she's got plenty of reserves, she's doing great, and the anxiety of being in limbo, she'd rather just get more credit towards long-term forgiveness, not a PSLF case. Okay. But knowing that she was on maternity leave for a couple months in 2024, and knowing that her what will be 2024 tax return will show a bit less of income compared to the most recent return that currently exists if she went and applied for pay today, which would be either her 2023 return or use current pay stubs, but that would be worse because she's making the same now. So it's like, oh, I noticed that, and I ran the math, if you just wait 1 or 2 more months to finish your 2024 married filing separate return, and you use that to apply for pay, the payment would have been like $300 to $400 less per month than if she just applied today with the tax return that currently exists. So that is an example of not waiting to switch, like still switching as soon as possible, but like, I guess waiting 1 or 2 extra months to be strategic because it just so happens that this year's tax return would a year's worth of payments on that's like an extra $3 to $4 grand savings than if you just try to jump ship and switch plans right now. This is all stupid, right? Like we're talking loans here. You can't, like, I always compare all of this back to my mortgage experience, and I'm like, I can never imagine a change in administration or government or whatever, like changing the terms of your loan. Like, could you imagine your 30-year fixed interest rate like changing, and then the amount of payments you have to make change on a drop of a dime because like politics? It's so silly. And I've never had to like decide on like what tax return to use when making my mortgage payment, right? And so it's just, I'm just venting at this point. But back to the example, that is an example of, oh, makes sense to switch for that specific person, but bump the brakes, do it strategically, switch in the best way possible to save the most money. Other update, we're talking about pay. That wasn't technically a thing until like halfway through December. Right? I think it was December 16th or 18th. Don't quote me on it. But what happened was, this was unrelated to the court case. After June 30th, if you weren't already in pay or ICR, unless you were a Parent Plus borrower, you couldn't get into it. They closed it to new entrants. But the only reason they did that had nothing to do with the court lawsuit. They did that because SAVE was supposed to be so good. It was literally in the SAVE regulations that they're trying to simplify the student loan system with less payment plan options. And so they retired SAVE pay for new entrants. Well, then shortly after this court case happened, which paused everything, and SAVE is looking like it's going to die, well, they brought pay back as an option. And they did that in the middle of December. It is technically open. You might see some leftover language on studentaid.gov that might make you think otherwise, but it is, at least as of the most recent announcement, it is still open. And so that was and is a big deal. Same thing with ICR. So that's a mess right now.
Yeah, and pay reopening is a big deal if you haven't been following student loans closely in the past few years, because pay is a really good plan for a certain population of student loan borrower. We'll talk a little bit more about IBR in this episode, but everyone, of course, has heard of IBR, so income-based repayment. So that was the original income-driven repayment plan. And then there are these other plans underneath the umbrella. So SAVE was one of them, and then there's pay, and then ICR as well. And so for folks who borrowed their first federal student loan after October 1st, 2007, but before July 1st, 2014, those are the folks who really should be looking at pay very closely now that it has reopened, if they are not on pay already. So the reason I mention those two dates, one is because of eligibility, but also because that July 1st, 2014 is the cutoff between the old version of IBR, which is based on 15% of discretionary income and is a 25-year plan, and the new IBR plan, where borrowers who started borrowing loans after that July 1st, 2014 mark, those folks are eligible for the new version of IBR, which is based on 10% of discretionary income, and it's a 20-year plan. So the big deal is that if you borrowed between that October 1st, 2007 and July 1st, 2014 timeframe, when you borrowed your first loan, so that's important to keep in mind, you could save a lot of money being on pay instead of being on the old version of IBR.
There's a lot there to unpack. The new version of IBR is quite a bit better than old IBR. And for a lot of our listeners, a lot of vets fall into this not eligible for new IBR rules, but would be eligible for pay. Yeah, I agree. It makes sense for a lot of people to look at their loan dates and see if they really need to strongly consider this pay plan in general, long-term, whether you switch today or tomorrow or choose to wait or whatever, just as a long-term planning opportunity. Do you need to look at pay or not? That cutoff date of 2014 is really rough. And it just kind of makes me angry. It's like, why does someone get penalized based off of the date that they took out their original loan? It's insane. Like, could you imagine coming to me for a mortgage and me being like, well, you are 10 years older than the last person I talked to, so you get a rate that's 3% higher because you're older. What? That's insane. So I always thought those cutoff date rules were insane, but hey, we don't make the rules. We just play the game.
Yeah.
And another point I'll bring up is with a lot of vets needing to put pay under the microscope to see if it's a good option for them, to want to see if they're eligible or if they're new IBR eligible, whatever. With SAVE allegedly, like potentially going away, something that a lot of vets didn't have to talk about for a while was payment caps. SAVE didn't have any payment cap in it. There was no income limit to get into SAVE. Pay, a lot of vets don't have to worry about it, but some do, especially if you were able to get in-school tuition and your loan balance is a bit lower than, the average vet loan balance, but still quite a bit compared to non-vets. If you make too much relative to your loan balance, you need to be really careful about how to apply for pay to get into it.
Same with IBR as well. It's got the payment cap.
Yeah, pay or IBR, they both have the same payment cap rules. And again, if you are a borrower who's been relying on Save or been in Save the last, year or two, you never had to think about partial financial hardship or what the heck that means, or payment caps or how that applies. So this isn't to scare anybody. For a lot of vets, pay or new IBR ended up being equal to or even potentially slightly better than Save anyway. Not for everyone. So it's not all gloom and doom. It's just there are some extra considerations that these plans have that Save didn't really.
Yeah, and nothing has changed with IBR. So that's just one thing to know. If you're already on IBR, if you're on income-based repayment and you've taken a look at your loans, for example, if you're a new grad and you're on the new version of IBR and you've already determined that's the best plan for you, stay on it. And nothing has changed. So now the old version of IBR, if you're on that plan, you're just going to want to make sure that you are not eligible for pay, because pay would be cheaper if you are eligible. The old version of IBR, the average payment, it's about 1.5 times what the payment was on Save. And so that's another, just a planning component to prepare for. Now, we don't know yet. We are 99% sure that Save is going to be toast. So we don't think Save is going to be a plan moving forward.
Here's what I'll say. If they axed the CFPB and Save sticks around, I'm going to be floored, right?
Yeah,
that would be insane.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong about it. Even if you think Save is going to survive, there's nothing wrong about having a contingency plan, because even if we're wrong and Save survives, which again, if the CFPB dies and Save survives, like, gosh, that is insane. But even if we're wrong, if Save does come back and is forgiveness eligible again and PSLF eligible and all that kind of stuff, there was no payment caps in it. There was no eligibility loan date requirement to it. You can always switch back to Save if it does end up surviving. So there's nothing wrong with having a contingency plan.
Oh, yeah. And the other thing that I was going to bring up is we don't know when they make the final decision on Save being toast, which is what we expect. Let's say you're in a situation where old IBR is the only plan that you would otherwise be eligible for, which is more expensive compared to what Save would have been. Now, there's a possibility that Save could revert back to the old repay rules. And if it does, you'll want to run your numbers. But if it does, then that may be less expensive, especially when you're comparing with the old version of IBR. Always want to run your numbers in a student loan calculator, get a student loan consult. Like, you're always going to want to do that. But that's just another component that I wanted to mention, because it's possible that they could revert to the old repay rules. We just don't know for sure what's going to happen yet. This is a personal opinion. In some ways, I feel like that could be the easy button for them. I think that would be a lot easier, because then they wouldn't have to require everybody to recertify their income right away, like they would have to do if they had to switch plans. That's something that I've thought of, where it would save a lot of people a lot of work if they decided to do that, but we just don't know yet.
Yeah, I've had plenty of consults, clients, where it'll be like, okay, well, repay currently doesn't exist. They've been quiet on it, but it is possible that, depending on how Save is struck down, that they do revert back to the old rules, in which case it's a lot of, if this happens, here's your best option. Here's your best tax filing status. If old rules back, repay's the thing again, should you do it? For some people, the answer is yes. For some people, the answer is no. We can go on forever, but something else about repay is it's the only plan that doesn't care whether you file separately or not.
Yes, and that's important.
And so that's super important. So if you just look at the percentages, 10% of discretionary income, 150% poverty level deduction versus 150% poverty level deduction, 15% of income for old IBR, some people might, if repay comes back, might just say repay is the answer. But it is more complicated than that, because many times 15% of weirdly calculated income for one person's income is better than 10% of two persons' incomes. So even if repay does come back and you are only old IBR eligible, it doesn't mean that it's your best plan. However, for some people, we run the numbers and it's like, no, repay would be better than old IBR. And then what if you're a double vet household and you both have student loans? Then repay, there's actually even some more complicated math that you have to run.
That's a lot more
which
complicated.
We won't go into this. But it's just to say a lot of what we're doing in consults is contingency planning of if X happens, do Y. If A happens, do B. If B happens, do C. And then that way you wake up in 3 months and we find out how Save dies. Then they just go, okay.
How it dies, he said.
How it dies. Was it euthanized? Was it shot with a shotgun in the back of the shed? Right? Like either way, that way you wake up and know, okay, this is what life looks like. What's my best option? Just do that. So with that, so that I don't say worse examples of how to kill something, why don't we wrap this up? I guess the big takeaway here is know what your options are. As you can see, it can get very complicated. It's silly, I know, but know your options, run the numbers, and if you need help doing that, we would love to be the people to help you. What if you could get fiduciary, veterinarian-specific financial planning that is student loan aware that could change your life? Go to slpwealth.com/vet for a free 15-minute intro call to see if we'd be a good fit for you. Again, that's slpwealth.com/vet. If you go there, you get to talk with one of us, even if you don't sign up. I also love some people have reached out from podcast listeners. It was so cool getting to talk to you guys. So would love to talk with you.
And until next time, take care and continue your path to financial success. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and should not be considered individualized financial advice.
If a specific investment is mentioned, it should not be considered a recommendation or endorsement to buy or sell the investment.
All investments involve risk.
Past performance does not guarantee future results.
You are encouraged to seek the advice of a financial professional before implementing any investment strategies discussed.
Yay, compliance.